What's up? What's up? I'm Dr. Omatma, host of Egg Meet Sperm, where we're busting fertility myths, sharing tangible tips for your fertility journey, and bringing you the most knowledgeable guests to support your journey to parenthood. This podcast is for both women and men because getting fertile as fuck is for both partners, don't you think? Remember, just listening to this podcast won't get you pregnant, but following the tips we share just may. Let's get you fertile AF so that you can co-create the family you dream of. And if your partner's not listening to this, make sure to share this episode with your partner. Hello and welcome back. I'm so excited. Today is an interview with Dr. Felice Gersh. She is a multi-award-winning physician with dual board certification in OBGYN and integrative medicine. She's the founder and director of the Integrative Medical Group of Irvine, a practice that provides comprehensive healthcare for women by combining the best evidence-based therapies from conventional, naturopathic, and holistic medicine. She taught OBGYN at Keck USC School of Medicine for 12 years as an assistant clinical professor, where she received the highly coveted Outstanding Volunteer Clinical Faculty Award. She now serves as an affiliate faculty member at the Fellowship in Integrative Medicine through the University of Arizona School of Medicine, where she lectures and regularly grades the case presentations written by the fellowship students for their final exams. My gosh, you are a busy doctor. Welcome. I'm so excited to have you. I know you have a couple of best-selling books. You have the PCOS SOS and PCOS SOS Fertility Fast Track. And you're well-authored. You've written, I'm sure, so many peer-reviewed medicine journal articles. And you're an amazing lecturer. So I'm just really excited to have you here today.
Well, I'm excited as well. And we have so many fun things to talk about.
We do. So let's jump in. I am really one of the biggest questions I get from women is either A, did the birth control that I took for 15 to 20 years affect negatively my fertility? So I really want to get into that. And then B, if I'm not ready to get pregnant yet, is there a contraceptive or hormonal birth control or whatever that would be safe enough for me to use to not get pregnant right now, but ensure that it won't harm my fertility later? So.
Well, those are, to me, such crucial questions and without fabulous answers. So we have to talk about what exists, what we wish for, and then making the best of what actually is out there. So unfortunately, depending on how you look at it, reproduction is integrated totally into the female body, and every organ system is actually evolved to support the reproductive processes. So if you try to shut down reproduction, I can tell you there will be collateral damage. It's just what it is. If you change the environment of the vagina or the uterine cavity, or you change your entire hormonal environment in your body, of course there are consequences, short-term and long-term. So, in order to actually solve a problem, you first have to define a problem. So if we look at some of the options, and then we talk about the pros and the cons. If we look at hormonal contraception, we start with oral contraception, and I call them similars, like rings or patches. They're all kind of in the same family as with the pill. So the way that they work is by putting chemical endocrine disruptors into the body. I mean, I'm just calling a spade a spade. That's what the hormones that are in hormonal contraception. They're actually, if you go to toxicology.gov, which is part of the National Institutes of Health, it will actually list all the ingredients as endocrine disruptors, and they do their job very well. They disrupt the normal hormones of the female body. So you don't produce them, or you don't have them work in the way that they normally would work. And so you don't have fertility. And that's what people want at certain stages of their lives. So that sounds good up to a point. Yeah.
Yeah. So you've already said a few things that I want to like break down a little bit more. One is you said that if you impact reproduction, you're going to negatively impact every system in the body. Can we just talk about that for a minute? Because this is so crucial for us to understand, right? So tell me more about that perspective.
Right. Well, many decades ago, when they invented the birth control pill, they had no idea what these hormones do in the body, except that they're involved in reproduction. But now, fast forward decades, we know that estrogen, estradiol, the estrogen made by the ovaries, and progesterone have receptors. In other words, they interact with cells located in every organ system of the body. And I give many lectures about estrogen as my favorite hormone, but I love them all. And estrogen in the form of estradiol has functions everywhere. So there are receptors for estrogen, and they come in 3 types, and they're located on the blood vessels, in the heart, in the brain, in all aspects of the brain, in the skin, in every aspect of the intestinal system, every aspect of the neurological system. You can go organ by organ by organ, and estrogen has receptors. So when you get estrogen normally in your body, every organ system is working in beautiful synchrony, including the clock genes and the master clock, because it turns out that we evolved on planet Earth, like every other creature, to work with the 24-hour rotation of Earth on its axis. And estrogen actually works to maintain, like I say, stay on the beat. So all our organs work in the same time zone. And so when you don't have the right hormones, you're not going to have everything working as it should. And you can go organ system by organ system. But it's not anything that happens really abruptly, typically. It's like a slow type of thing. When you add in ethinyl estradiol, which is the estrogen that's found in the birth control pills, it works differently because it doesn't bind to the different receptors. It only binds predominantly to one receptor. So it's like only certain things are turned on all the time, and you don't get the balance. So, for example, your immune system is more in an upregulated system. So you go into a more pro-inflammatory state, which we don't want to be always inflammatory. That's why birth control pills, as a potential complication, can increase the risk of blood clots, which most people know. And it's not like an isolated thing. It just increases blood clots. And fortunately, because the incidence is so low in younger women, even though you're increasing the risk absolutely is still on the low side. But that's indicative of one aspect, how there are actually immune cells all over the body doing amazing things. And every one of them has receptors for estrogen. So when you actually imbalance the different estrogen receptors, you're going to impact virtually every organ system. So if you look at, for example, the brain, we know that women on birth control pills have higher rates of anxiety and depression, especially younger women. When they look at the gut microbiome, that sort of group of trillions of microbes that live in our GI tract, there's an alteration of the gut microbiome. And there's very little data on this, but like one study showed that you do create a circadian rhythm dysfunction. We know that some women have appetite dysregulation, alteration of their sleep. So, but it's very subtle. But in terms of like nutrients, and we can touch on that, birth control pills will change the nutrient status of the body, which most people don't know. And because receptors are dynamic and like they're changeable, kind of like shapeshifters, they can be altered long-term, at the least short-term, but over the long haul, into functioning differently. If you put in the wrong type of estrogen, or you don't have receptors that are getting used, it's like use it or lose it. The receptors, after years and years of being on birth control pills, can behave differently, at least for a while. And these are many areas that really are still lacking enough research, because unfortunately the birth control pill is so entrenched into our culture and our society now, and part of women's rights, which I want women to have rights to control their reproductive destiny. But we do need to understand that these are really playing a little bit with fire here. they're changing the fundamental hormonal foundation of the female body, which is critical to having optimal function of the female body in every organ system.
Yeah. Wow. So basically, if we are taking this hormonal contraception, it's giving the body a different type of estrogen that still binds to the receptors that we think of as estrogen-driven receptors, but the impact through the other systems of our body, our cardiovascular system, our neurotransmitter function, our gut microbiome, all of those are not being impacted the same way as our as not being on birth control, as our normal own production of estrogen and progesterone would go.
Right, because it doesn't bind in the same balanced manner to the receptor. So it's a little bit like you're speaking with, in a way that you're dropping every few words. It's really hard to get the message because hormones are message delivery systems. So the messages delivered to the cells are going to be not quite what they should be.
Yeah. Yeah. Very well demonstrated in terms of the far-reaching impact of not having the right signaling compounds.
Right.
So now we can move on to what are the types of contraceptions that we have available and how many of those are not having this global impact on our body.
So if we look at the Levonorgestrel Iuds. So they come in Skyla, Mirena, they come a few different Kylena. So they're like slightly different doses. So when they first came out on the market, they were actually marketed as solely having a local effect within the endometrial cavity inside the uterine lining, that it would change the uterine lining. We know that that is not true. We knew that a long time ago, and that it's actually absorbed. So it's really systemic, meaning that it's going to be absorbed into the bloodstream and it's going to be distributed throughout the entire body. So it's really taking a hormone, which is not in the body, called levonorgestrel, which has binding ability to multiple different hormone systems besides just progesterone. It also combined to androgens and maybe the cortisol. So it has a variety of different receptors that it can actually relate to, but not in a human way. But it does get absorbed, but not as much as if you're on, say, a contraceptive pill that has that in it, like there are pills that have that as the so-called progestin. But it does get distributed, and at least half of women using those types of contraceptive IUDs will stop ovulating. So it's going to impact their estrogen production. So it does have a systemic, like a real total body effect. In terms of the local effect, it will change the local microbiome of the uterine cavity, the fallopian tubes, the ovaries, the cervix. And of course, like everything we're going to be talking about, there's never enough data because there's not as much incentive to do research as we'd like into these different areas. And what we really don't know is how long it takes to recover from this and how to really improve recovery. That's why I say, well, if you can, try to be off of all of these kinds of contraceptives for like a year to at least give your body a chance to kind of get its act back together and recoup and get your microbiomes better. One of the things that is not being looked at that I have concerns about is when you are using, for example, the Mirena type IUDs, what does that mean when you do get pregnant? Because people obviously pull them out and then they get pregnant off some of them really quickly. So, but we have just an explosion of pregnancy-related complications these days. Like that's why we have just an incredibly high C-section rate. And it's not because all the OBGYNs want to just go home and just get C-sections done. It's because we have dysfunctional labors. Some women don't go into labor when they're supposed to. Their labors are not actually getting the babies out. Like the contractions of the uterus are not really doing the job that they need to do to dilate the cervix properly. We have a host of problems that are happening with premature labor and so on. And I keep wondering, are these contraceptives that when they take them out and they get pregnant right away, is that contributing? Because we know progesterone is really critical to the whole labor process. All of these hormones are multitasking throughout the body. So, so my real urging to everyone is whatever you're doing, please, if you can try to plan ahead and have a whole year to let your body get back in shape. Because even if you actually get pregnant, I am seeing so many complications in pregnancy in women who have gotten pregnant in a short time frame after stopping the hormonal contraceptives. And it really makes me wonder. I have no proof, but it's really a concern as we understand the complexity of the reproductive system, that we need these hormones for every aspect of reproduction from A to Z. So that group of contraceptives are quite effective, but, they do have all of those ramifications. The other type of IUD, which has copper in it, maintains, sort of its, success rate as a contraception by creating inflammation, because copper in high amounts is actually pro-inflammatory. And it's supposed to create a local effect. But, we work so hard in functional medicine to reduce inflammation in the body that it just always feels kind of a little uncomfortable that we're inserting things that create inflammation in the body. But on the other hand, we have to help people to time their pregnancies. So if I have to choose, I would say maybe go with the copper. But once again, we know that women with copper IUDs have higher rates of getting vaginal infections, like they're more susceptible to catching HPV or HIV, and other things like bacterial vaginosis. So we know it alters the body's vaginal capabilities of fighting off infections. It changes the microbiome. So, it always sounds so gloomy because reproduction is so fundamental to female health and we now know the vagina and the cervix are not just sort of inanimate objects, just sort of sitting there. They're like everything is dynamic, filled with life forms, all these microbes that are actually tremendously functional. Like there's this incredible synergy and interaction. So that's where I say, please, at least, try to get them out of your body for a year if you can before you try to get pregnant, so that once again, the microbiomes, I can think of people who had really significant problems during pregnancy when they had their copper IUDs pulled and then they immediately got pregnant. But once again, lack of data. So I'm talking about my observational, in my practice where I see things. And I guess I really need to be more, fastidious at keeping records, because then I can start publishing, because my observations are not really being translated into anything, because many doctors, they don't see a connection. Like if someone has a problem in pregnancy, they never think, I wonder what contraception they were using before they got pregnant. That never even comes into the conversation. And unfortunately.
Yeah. Isn't it so interesting though, that we do see these connections? I can't tell you the number of times women have come in with, especially the copper IUD, but all across the board, with like such thin uterine lining that they can't sustain a pregnancy, right? So they're like, I'm getting pregnant, I can't stay pregnant. And then we get into like the potential impact. And again, this is like just observation because there is no research for this, but like how many times, I'm curious if you've seen this also, if women who have potentially copper IUDs, who before getting the IUD, their fertility was completely on track, normal, everything was like, if we did before and after studies, which some of them I have, where we tested the day 3 hormones prior to an IUD, FSH, LH, AMH, estradiol, do it before and then get the IUD in a year after. And what I've seen is that the AMH just drastically drops to the point where there is no, what looks like there are no eggs left for this woman. And I've had like dear friends that have unfortunately like had that experience and gone on to need egg donors. And it like breaks my heart that there isn't research on this, right? Because I feel like copper IUD could potentially be a great avenue for a lot of people. But if we had more data, then we could actually say, well, based on your numbers and your history and your background, a copper IUD would probably not be the right fit for you. Whereas for someone else, it may be perfectly fine.
Yeah.
But it's like we as practitioners can't really like dial in and figure out like what is the best case scenario for this person in front of me, because there is just a lack of research, and there's no kind of expectation, or not even expectation, but accepting responsibility that this could have these effects. So let's do what we can to educate people, and then let's help them make an empowered choice, because I believe that birth control is amazing, and it came out of the women's health movement. We want it for women's empowerment. We want people to have choices, but not at the cost of future reproductive health.
Absolutely. And like with the copper IUD, because it's so pro-inflammatory, and now we know that this inflammation can envelop more than just the endometrial cavity. What if for some women, it actually creates an inflammation in the ovary, right? And then causes premature aging, because inflammation is like inflammaging, it ages. And I sadly, I consider birth control pills to be a pro-aging situation, because it's pro-inflammatory. Anything that's pro-inflammatory in the body in any form or fashion is going to accelerate the aging process, which is really degradation of mitochondrial function, which is how you produce energy. That's what happens with old people. They can't make energy. That's why they sit on the bench while all the little kids with energy are playing in the park. So, that's why, I urge my patients, if you're willing, use a condom. I know it's like seems archaic to some people when they're in a long-term relationship. And I say, look, you care about your health. Your partner cares about your health. Condoms have their own, some issues, but when you break it down, it's far fewer issues if you use a condom compared to all the other things that we've been talking about. And, you can just try to make it fun, like they come in different types of materials and different textures, and try to make it fun if you can. Why not? And at least try to do breaks. Like the idea that I see women, I know that you do too. I just had one in my office yesterday. She went on birth control pills for actually no particular reason other than to have regular cycles because of her sporting activities. That was her indication, to know when your period is until you can manipulate it for sporting, events. And so she started the birth control pill at age 15. And then at age 31, she wanted to start getting pregnant. So that's how long she was on the birth control pill. So like her whole reproductive life, because she only got her period at age 14. It's like so amazing. And guess what? Surprise, things didn't work right. And in her case, she like exploded with what looked like PCOS. And I'm seeing that all the time. I really believe that it's altering the way that the ovary can transform testosterone into estradiol, that you're messing with the ovary when you're on birth control pills so long term. So that they make testosterone, somehow that always is the fallback position. You can make testosterone, but they can't convert it to estradiol. So they get this explosion of testosterone. And then suddenly out of the blue, they're getting facial hair and acne and irregular cycles. And of course, they hadn't even had very many cycles before they went on the pill, but they didn't have any problems at that time at all. And so it's like, is this like they were destined to have PCOS, or did the pill create PCOS? No data, just my observation that it's happening rampantly. So it's just like, I know association is not causation, but seems highly suspicious to me. And I can kind of work through the mechanism. So it's not like, just randomness, because we understand how receptors can be altered, and we understand PCOS now as a problem that is about transformation of testosterone into estradiol and problems with estrogen receptor function in the body and endocrine disruptors. Well, remember, birth control pills are an endocrine disruptor. So it's, I think there's an association. I just wish that other people would be interested and we can actually get some data.
Yeah, I think I'm with you. I think data would really drive proper decision making as a provider. I think that gives us the power to say, hey, for you, I'd go this way versus that way. That simple.
I know.
And I totally agree with you. I feel like condoms, even though they sound archaic, are a really good solution because they're not staying in your body. Right?
Yeah.
Like everything else that we have as a potential contraception is literally like manipulating what our body is on a fundamental level, right? It's either hormones all throughout or even localized that supposedly don't have any impact on the global health of the body, but they do. And if we could, until we know more, I feel like that's a really good avenue. You mentioned PCOS, and I know that you're super passionate and knowledgeable about this. So can we just talk for a couple of minutes on what is I kind of think of it as like a Band-Aid, like we're slapping on this Band-Aid for young women that are potentially showing signs of PCOS pretty early on, or even endometriosis. I've seen this happen with a lot. These women are like getting put on birth control at 13, 14, 15 because, and not out of choice, but because their parent takes them to the doctor and the doctor says, oh, you have hormonal irregularity. Let's get your hormones fixed by putting you on contraception. So it's like viewed as this magical pill, but how much of that do you see in your practice turn into women that come in at 30 and now all of a sudden they're like, well, I've never really had a regular period. And when it was irregular, I was put on birth control. I've been on birth control for 15 years and now I'm trying to get pregnant. So can you help me?
Yeah, well, it's definitely symptom improving for some women. But the way I think of it is like if you have a wall and it's all filled with mold and termites, but it's so hard to remediate. It takes time and effort and money. So you know what? You're just going to slap on some really pretty wallpaper and kick the can down the road, right? Because meanwhile, while that wallpaper is covering up the problem, that problem is festering. And honestly, that's what's happening. If you can't be on birth control pills until you're 90. I mean, at some point you got to get off of them, and you certainly can't get pregnant with them. And it's a real cover up, and it doesn't even cover up the adrenal. When women who have PCOS problems where their androgens are coming from the adrenal gland, which often never even get worked up at all, and it's really sort of like a subset that's somewhat different, but they can overlap. And you're not addressing the issues involving the metabolic problems. In fact, once you understand birth control pills are exacerbators of metabolic problems, that's why we don't give them to smokers who are older. I don't think they should go to smokers at any age, but I mean, like, I don't know who's out there smoking anyway, but there are some people that still smoke. And we know smoking is a risk factor for hypertension and heart attacks and so on. So you don't give birth control pills to that group. So why would you give it to women who have PCOS when we know that they have higher risk for cardiometabolic dysfunction? So that's crazy. It's like we know women with birth control pills, as I mentioned, have higher rates of blood clotting, and so do women with PCOS because they're in a pro-inflammatory state, which part of the inflammatory response is creating blood clotting so you don't bleed to death. It's life-saving in the right situation, but when you're just chronically pro-inflammatory and pro-clotting, that is, of course, a problem. And you're actually exacerbating that situation when you add birth control pills into the mix. So you're only covering up the problem. And in my opinion, you're actually worsening the problem. It's just that you don't necessarily see it because you're dealing with younger women, but it will come to bite you later if they have earlier onset of hypertension, an earlier onset of heart attacks, diabetes, and, that their fertility, instead of being enhanced, obviously is being even more suppressed. You're not fixing and you're not regulating, you're just covering up. So I hear it all the time in my practice too. When women come in, they say, well, they were put on it so that they would regulate and control their hormones. You're not regulating, you're shutting down the entire ovarian function and replacing it with these like pseudo hormones, because I call them pseudo because you would never say licking plastic is how you get your hormonal dose for the day, but really they're comparables. BPA tried to end up as a pharmaceutical, and it was surpassed and passed over, and they chose DES, diethylstilbestrol, which had catastrophic effects on pregnant women. But BPA was one of the, in the running. That's plastic, BPA, a well-known endocrine disruptor. So the chemicals really are endocrine disruptors. And so you're taking a woman who already has a problem with detoxification and tends to have higher body loads of endocrine disruptors like BPA. And now you're adding in another situation of more endocrine disruptors. So obviously, I'm kind of anti-birth control pills for women who really need so much deep dive into their metabolic health, their gut health, their emotional health, because PCOS is, I call it the poster child for how complex metabolic issues intersect with complex reproductive issues. And, and birth control pills doesn't address any of them.
Man, we have talked about so much today. And I is there a message that you want to share with women, whether it's around birth control or anything else? Do you have a message that you would like to share with all the women that are listening to? Yes.
When I grew up, this is so sad. They called having your menstrual period, you're on the curse. You have the curse. And that's how many women have been programmed. So I tell women at every stage of life to embrace your femininity, your hormones, your beautiful rhythms and cycles, and your menstrual periods, and recognize that the menstrual cycle is a vital sign of female health. So the last thing you want to do is get rid of it or cover it up. You want to nurture it and really embrace it as showing that you are a healthy, functioning female. So that is part of being a female. So you don't want someone ever to say, we're just going to shut down your system. You want to say, I want someone to help my system to be optimized for ideal functioning so I can have an optimal state of health and happiness and the brightest future possible.
Thank you for sharing that message. We need to hear this message. If I was in person, I'd give you a big hug. And if I was in an audience listening to you, I would give you a standing ovation. We need this message out there. So thank you so much for coming on our podcast and sharing this message with all the amazing women that are going to be tuning in. Was that an amazing episode or what? Make sure to check our show notes so that you can link up with our guests. And if you're not a part of our secret Fertile AF community, you can join for free via the link in our show notes. Last but not least, have you showed us some love lately? It would mean the world to us if you could share and review our podcast. Thank you so much. We'll see you next time on Egg Meets Sperm. Peace.